Hello, and welcome to I'm a Fan of That, a podcast about all things fandom, told through objects, stories, and studies, with a bit of silliness thrown in along the way. Your hosts on this journey are Dr. Vivian Asimos, public anthropologist and pop culture academic, and me, pop culture writer and journalist, all-round enthusiast, Holly Swinyard. Join us as we deep dive into the wonderful and wacky world of fan culture, its history, the people who make it up, and the way we look at this ever-growing part of our society. Fair warning, we may well talk about some adult themes, use some adult language, and possibly get a bit nerdy about the whole thing. You have been warned.
Hello everybody and welcome back to I'm a Fan of That, where we talk about the wonderfully complicated worlds of fandom through the objects we love. I'm Vivian and Asimos, your pop anthropologist, and as always I am joined by Olly Swinyard.
Hi! Author, scriptwriter, gay... I don't know what I am anymore. I'm
all
a writer.
around
I
writer and pop culture expert and explainer of a lot of history to Vivian. Olly Swinyard.
Yay! That's my job. Oh.
So today, this topic actually came from a Discord suggestion from our Patreon. I don't know if you remember that, Holly, but that's where it came from.
I do know what that's, yeah. And also, if you want to suggest ideas for episodes, join our Patreon. It's not that expensive. I think it's £1 to join the Discord, and then you come and annoy us. It's great.
So I have brought, as my little introduction to this, this is my husband's coffee grinder. I was hitting myself in the face with it.
I'm so glad we have a video component now.
So this is my husband's coffee grinder, and I don't fully understand how it works because I've never used it.
I assume they work like salt grinders, like for salt and pepper. I feel like it's a similar principle. That you put the thing in and then you turn the handle and it comes out.
I think you put the beans in here, or I broke it. I don't know which one.
Well, just don't tell him. Just put it back on the shelf and he'll figure it out. So this is actually a rare episode where we both have items and this is a espresso maker for putting on a stovetop, and it's called the Pinocchio because it's got a little nose and a little hat, and it's very cute. And my house is full of these, despite the fact that nobody who currently lives in it drinks espresso out of them, because these were collected by my dad that nobody ever uses now, but they look really nice on a shelf. So coffee fandom, we're talking about coffee, which is weird because I don't drink coffee at all, and you barely drink coffee.
I have gotten, so I frequent cafes, as people who follow my vlogs or Instagram will know.
A writer in cafes? What? Shocking.
And I do tend to get coffee when I go there. And then I started drinking coffee at home when Tom got really into coffee making. But I tend to not drink it very often. I do have a cup today out of instant, just for the sake of theme.
I do not. I have a carousel teapot. For people who can't see the video, I don't like coffee. I just don't. It's too bitter and not fun. I will drink those ridiculously sugary mocha things because they don't taste like coffee. They taste like chocolate. When I, in my student days, worked very early in the morning in a terrible bar. So we're talking like very early in the morning to do setup. I would drink an espresso when I started work, and I think it made me hate them more because I would just be like, shut it, that's disgusting. I now have to do my rubbish job. Nobody likes that. So I think it might have made it worse. Just by association, that coffee now reminds me of not only going to work at like 4 a.m, but also having the smell of stale beer alongside it because you're cleaning up after essentially I would be cleaning up after people had been in the terrible bar the night before, which is no fun. And so maybe I have ruined coffee for myself, but who knows? Maybe one day I'll change my mind.
I also found coffee often too bitter, which is why I like to drink what I call candy bar coffees, which are like the super sugary. I think Holly has seen one of my orders, which is one of the local coffee shops here does a caramel latte where they top it with cream and caramel drizzle.
And it's just a milkshake.
It is. It's an adult milkshake and I love it. Yeah. So those are typically what I get. So when Tom first started making coffee, I would always have him put milk because that tends to reduce a lot of the bitterness and the acidity for me, or sugar in it as well. But then he started getting really good at making coffees, and he started finding roasts that I liked, because apparently what I have learned is that not all coffee is supposed to be bitter. That is apparently either a specifically chosen thing or somebody brewed it wrong. Yeah, like Tom has made me coffee that is not bitter, and I have not needed sugar or milk in it.
Maybe I need to try coffee at your house. So
putting way too much pressure on Tom.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. What if I do? So I can imagine that people listening to this podcast are fully aware of tea fandom, right? They'll be fully aware of like the way that people blend teas and that people get very into it and doing it right and all this sort of stuff, having their little carousel teapots or making their matcha or their green teas in specific ways, right? I can imagine our nerdy listeners probably have some idea that exists. Coffee fandom, pretty much the same principle, but for coffee. I'm not surprised by the fact that in the same way that different teas, depending on when they're harvested, what level of processing they go through, all this sort of stuff taste different. So like a white tea, I know we're meant to be talking about coffee, but a white tea is essentially just it's not a different type of tea plant necessarily. It can be the first buds of a new plant and things like that. The same is true of green teas. So like it depends on the type of tree, and obviously some are different plants because there are various different things. Oolong, Assam, all the Darjeeling, they're all different plants and different ways of growing, but that doesn't necessarily mean that all the different teas are different plants. That makes sense. And I guess that's the same with coffee, right? You could probably have the same coffee beans processed in different ways and they would all taste different, because it totally makes sense that would be the case. And also I could imagine that people who are maybe not very good at making coffee will make it more bitter. Like sometimes you go into a coffee shop and there's that smell of burnt coffee grounds. And then I've been told that makes the coffee more bitter. So if you like a bitter coffee, you actually want that smell. But if you don't, that smell is a bad sign and you shouldn't go there.
Yeah, because like obviously, like I said, some coffees are meant to be bitter because some people do like that. But Tom has gotten very into James Hoffman, which I'm sure a lot of people have heard of, but he's a YouTuber that explains coffee stuff. He's a coffee guy.
Oh, is he like the guy who tries things from like IKEA and stuff to see if it's
probably? I mean, he does that too. He also explains like how you're supposed to roast things and how you're supposed to grind them and how different temperatures in water changes the way that you can taste coffee differently. And he does the whole thing. Yeah. So Tom has been watching a lot of them in order to learn a lot about how to make coffee good. And so through osmosis, I have also learned a lot about it. It is one of those things where he actually talks a lot about how he tends to not choose bitter coffees. And so it was really lovely hearing somebody who's like a coffee guy to be like, oh no, coffee, I don't like when coffee's bitter. And it's like, but I thought that was coffee. I thought coffee was bitter.
Yeah. Well, tea can be bitter, and it's again, I think it's one of these things, right? I think all of these sort of ideas come down to the same principle of, if you're a whiskey person, you're going to know what whiskey is peaty, which one's really, which one's smooth, or this kind of stuff. You're going to have those different, you're going to know, and so you're going to find the one you like. And the same is true of wine or any of these things. There's a beverage fandom, not going to lie, is probably the most snobby kind of fandom I've ever come across. There are very serious opinions about everything, and I think coffee fandom very much falls into that. And it's interesting because I think almost all of these fandoms have a basis in, or Ollie's going to go on, I think it's a basis on classism and colonialism, because the way that particularly coffee and tea is perceived and consumed has its roots in those things of who could have it, how you accessed it, the way that you did have it. So if you had it at home, or if you went to a coffee shop or a coffee house in the 17th century. And it's a really interesting history. And I think that in the same way that wine fandom is snobby, I'm sure they don't like being called wine fandom, but they are. Wine fandom is really snobby. I think it might be a similar kind of thing that comes from those roots of who's allowed to access it.
I mean, there's also a lovely historical differences in America. So for American people were more of coffee historically than tea, and that was because of the Boston Tea Party There was an
of course.
absolute rejection of tea, so it was seen as all American to drink coffee. So then it became this American drink that you drink coffee. And I grew up with coffee in the house. I didn't grow up with tea. And it wasn't until, because I never liked coffee. And so but I needed caffeine when I started to get older. So that's when I discovered tea. I know that sounds strange for a Brit, for someone to say that in high school, like at 16, I was like, oh, tea? That's a thing? Let me learn about tea.
You didn't have it in the cradle?
But yeah, so there was, and that was also around the time where it was starting to become a little bit more popular around younger people in America, where you would get, like, where you could go and buy the loose leaf tea, because you couldn't really, like, we don't have Yorkshire tea bags.
Oh.
We only have, like, really shitty ones. So, like, you know, like, you had to, like, so for me to get a lot of tea and different tea varieties, particularly, like, green tea and white tea, I had to get loose leaf. We didn't have it any other fashion. Yeah. So then I got really into tea. Like, I got into the tea fandom of it all and learning all about the different types and how you brew it and what temperatures. And I started developing that kind of ritual. And so when Tom met me, that's what we did. But then he started wanting that with coffee, which is why he started going down the rabbit hole of learning about how to grind it and how to, so we buy whole beans. So he self-grinds it even when we're doing a cafetiere. And because for him, it's all about the ritual of making the coffee. And I think that's a really big part for a lot of people, is that process of being able to sit and do the activity of making coffee.
And I think it's about time. And it's interesting what you said about the fact that it was different in America. And actually, I think it's probably different in different places in Europe as well. Because in Italy and France and Spain and even places, actually Turkey and Greece, all that sort of stuff, they have a ritual around coffee. And it's very distinct to their culture. Turkish coffee is not the same as Italian coffee at all in any way. And Italian coffee is not the same as French coffee, and French coffee is not the same as Spanish coffee. And they're all, but they have ritual to them. I mean, Italian particularly is the most I find fascinating, because you can only have a cappuccino up until lunchtime. And even if you have it too close to lunchtime, they're not that chill with it. It's like 11 o'clock's probably the cutoff, because it's a breakfast drink. It's foamy and sweet and all that kind of stuff. But you have an espresso for, you know, all this sort of stuff. And I don't know if our listeners have been to Italy recently. But you know, particularly in places like Sicily, they gather around these sort of outdoor little bodegas, I guess. You know, they're all the men, and not just men, people, but often men. Traditionally, I suppose it would be men, standing around and having their little shot of coffee just there. They'll pass the time of day and then they'll move on. Like, that's part of the ritual of coffee at certain times of day, particularly in the early morning and the evening. But you have your cappuccino for breakfast. And then, you know, you have a different thing at different times of day. And then in France, you obviously have lattes, and they're a long drink, and it's a slightly different thing. It's more about a relaxed moment. And it's just all of those different things. The way the coffee is made, whether it's long with milk or whether it's short, tells you how it's meant to be drunk. And that's part of their culture. It's not a fandom thing in the same way as it might be for, you know, with all that kind of the ritual and the preparation is inherent to their food culture. And that's I think a very different way of looking at it to maybe in the UK, where we do have that thing of how coffee got here and how we treat it. And that, like I said, there is a level of intellectual classism within it, I think, as well. This is coming from the idea of the coffee houses and stuff, where people, particularly men, would go and discuss the ideas of the day and do trade and business together. And they'd be doing those in the coffee houses. That's where Byron and his ilk used to go and, you know, wax lyrical, and you'd know that the philosophers and stuff would go there. That would be where it was, gossip and talk to each other. It was sort of like going to the pub, but with coffee, and that was cool and trendy and all that kind of stuff. So there is that's a slightly different thing in the UK as to how it is in other places in Europe, and clearly how different it is to America, because America has a very different relationship with coffee for obvious reasons, you know. So it is, I think it's something that food, and I'm sure you'll go on about this at length in a very anthropological way, but food and drink is inherent to the culture that it is partaking in it, and it's going to be different everywhere. That's my perception of having travelled and been able to engage with those cultures, is that it's different. The tea ceremonies in China and Japan, for example, are they're very much a thing of there. We don't have a tea ceremony in England, despite the fact that we love it. I lied. We have the tea alarm.
I was about to say, I would argue that there is, I mean, other than the tea alarm, but I would argue that there is a very fundamental tea ceremony in a way in British culture, but it's just very different. And there is a way of having tea and sitting down, and you are sitting all in the lounge together on your little different settees, drinking your tea and starting to gossip. Yeah. It is a very gossipy, at home in the countryside ceremony, a social ceremony of togetherness. Of somebody saying, should I put the kettle on? That's like a very, like, it's not just, do you want a cup of tea? It's, do you want to partake in this moment with me?
I mean, as well as that, I think particularly I can only truly speak for my own culture, which is being British, but the way that we use tea is in place of, I think, emotional reaction. That sounds really awful. But if someone's upset or hurt, you go, oh, let me put the kettle on. Let me get you a cup of tea. You know,
because it's the socialness, it's the social togetherness,
exactly. And I think that it's very clearly part of that.
Because it's that's definitely a moment, like, around my in-laws, that even when we're just sitting around, we can all be doing separate things in the same room, and then as soon as my mother-in-law says, should I put the kettle on, everyone puts their stuff down.
Yeah.
And it's like this unspoken cue of, even if they don't speak while they're drinking the tea, we're all drinking the tea together. It's like this moment of, in this moment, we are all drinking tea together.
Yeah. And it's the thing of, it's the phrase, I think there's obviously the phrasing of, hey, do you want to grab a coffee? You know, and it's that thing of, we're not necessarily grabbing a coffee, we're getting a beverage of choice, but we're going to the place where we can...
Yeah, we're going for a chat together. We're going to spend time. We're going to learn about each other. We're going to chat.
And often it's a thing of, hey, do you need to talk? Do you want to get a coffee? Do you need to talk? You know, and I think it's a very interesting thing that we use. I'm going to use food as a broad term because obviously these are drinks, but we use food in that way that it's not just, I need to put sustenance inside me. It's, hey, do you want to come and sit down, have a drink? You know, kind of thing. Yeah. And we also do that with alcohol, right? We do that about the pub. I mean, yeah. So it's definitely socialness in food is important. And I'm sure someone's done many papers on that.
Not just someone, many people. It's a whole fucking field, as always. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, as an anthropologist, food is always one of my favorite kind of things to find and center around and discuss, because it is such like a window into much more complicated dynamics of a culture. You can learn a lot about a particular community group, or even just like within a family, when you start looking at food and the way that people engage with food and drink and engage. Because like I said, you know, the way that my in-laws, for example, will talk about the kettle might not be the way that another family does, but I see the dynamics of how it works there. Basically, food is, like you said, it's definitely related to like social, cultural, and national norms. There's a lot of, like I said, the idea that drinking tea is considered un-American. I don't know if it still is, but it definitely was, like, when I was younger. I don't know if people would have said that out loud or recognized, like, if I started drinking tea, they wouldn't be like, oh, what are you doing a British thing for? Like, that's not quite how it would click, but it would be, oh, well, that's different. Oh, that's not what we do. Like, there is that level of national identity tied to things.
When I was in Georgia last summer, it was funny that in a few places I would ask for tea and they'd hear my accent and they'd be like, they would literally check with me, do you want our tea, as in sweet tea, or do you want like British tea? And they would like look at me with like concern that I needed to know this. And to be fair, the first time I was incredibly jet lagged. It was like 7:30 in the morning and I'd been awake since 4 because I just couldn't deal. Yeah, I kind of went, oh, I meant British tea, like this little tiny little English accent. And this girl looked at me and went, okay, sweetie. And I was like, thanks.
I had warned Tom before we went to America. I said, if you want to order some tea, just order some hot tea. That's all you have to say is just, I want some hot tea. And they'll give you British, I mean, it's shitty British tea, but it'll be like a hot tea bag tea. But I said, but if you just say you want tea, they will give you a big glass of sweet iced tea. Like
particularly in the South.
Yeah.
And then we had sweet tea, and then I tried like the stuff that's really like Georgia tea. That's not tea, that's syrup. It's syrup. And I couldn't have more than 2 mouthfuls of it before I just went, not okay. So for people who know, Egg loves like sweet things and is a big fan of a sweet treat. Egg couldn't drink it. It was that bad. Like, I mean, it was lovely, but it was also like, this is too much. And so after that, we went for unsweetened the entire time. And even that was special. It was a lot. I love an iced tea. I'm a big fan. Like I got really into iced tea in New York when I was there a few years ago, and I think New York iced tea is a very different thing to what it is in the South, and it's very similar to what they have in Canada as well. Like Canadian iced tea is a thing as well for people, and I'm sure there's a lot of people from Southern America who are like, not Southern America, Southern USA, who are going, what are you talking about? Why were you drinking that? And I'm like, it was nice. It was cold and I was hot. But it did the caffeine thing and wasn't Coke. It's really interesting to have that conversation. Be like, oh no, we even have to, that's a different thing as well. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing with food in general is that it's a form of communication. Like you said, just saying, do you want a cup of tea, or do you want to go for a coffee? It's a way of communicating more than just, are you interested in a latte? Like, it is more complicated than that. And it's a form of communication and sharing. And the way that people communicate with each other is often nonverbal. And food is one of those nonverbal communications. And so it becomes like a really important element of understanding yourself, understanding the other people around you, understanding culture when you are outside of it, or understanding culture when you're inside of it. Because I think sometimes, like you said, there's a lot of things that, you take for granted because you're not around the different of going, oh, well, we don't have this. And it's like, well, from someone outside, I can tell you do. Right? Because yeah. I'm not going, well, that's nothing, that's just a thing that happens. And it's like, yes, that's how the other people think too.
Yeah. And I suppose as well, because from inside the thing, you don't see it as ritual. You don't see the thing of putting the kettle on and getting the cup out and all that sort of stuff, and doing the, oh, do you have sugar and all that kind of, you don't see it as that. You just see it as doing the task. And particularly because I guess we have this romanticized idea for many reasons in the West about things like tea ceremonies, because they are structured, they are a thing, and there is a tea master and all this sort of stuff. But at the same time, it's still just, it's a part of their culture that is maybe more structured than it is in ours, but that doesn't mean that it's not ritual in ours in the same way. And that's a really interesting way to think about it. That being said, I have been to a tea ceremony and it is amazing. It is like the literal structure of the whole thing and the way it's done and presented does make you really appreciate the drink you have at the end. Like it really just makes you think about the food, and I think that's quite a cool thing to do, is to think about what it is you're about to partake in, and like what's being given to you is a really lovely way to think about food as well. So it's a different cultural thing, and I suppose it's an appreciation of produce, which we don't do very much, particularly again in the West and where we live. We don't, it's just there, it's just food, and we don't necessarily think about it in the same way. So maybe we should be better at thinking about what it is we're doing things that with.
One of my favorite things that I learned about just having a normal like pot of tea in a social situation in, say, Japan, is that one of the things about having green tea is that it also is social cues throughout the pot, because they don't take out the leaves, right? So at the beginning of you sit down, they've made the tea, you pour your first cup, it's really weak. So it's like, well, you gotta stay until the tea's good, right? Like, you gotta wait. So then you keep hanging out, and then you have really nice tea, but then as time goes on, it gets really bitter, and that's like, okay, now you go. Like, the tea's bad now, you go.
What a useful thing.
I know. And I'm like, I like that, like, general, like, okay, you are staying over at my house for only the amount of time of a pot of tea, and that is it.
Yeah. Because I suppose as well, if you're like, no, we're good, we're having a nice time, The offer of another pot of tea
Yeah.
is a very specific thing to say, no, I don't want you to leave yet. I want you to stay. What useful social cues? My God, that would be so helpful. Can we do that? The tea's bag, get the hell out. The problem is no one else in the UK would get it. They'd just be like, oh no, I'll just do another one.
I'll
like,
just make another pot. No, I have no more pots. But I also, so one of the things that we have found in our growing coffee ritual is when we have it, because Tom doesn't make coffee on weekdays. He only does them on weekends. And it's always like he goes and does it, and then he comes back and he serves the tea and the coffee, and it's often that I have to wait before he can pour it or whatever, because it's like timed. He's got a timer on his phone for like when it's right. And then we sit and do the New York Times word games. So we do the crossword and Wordle and Connection, which we do all of those throughout the week anyway, but but the Saturday and Sunday ones are harder. So we spend more time with it. So we drink the coffee and sit on the couch and do word games together.
You guys are so old-fashioned and adorable.
I know! I was joking around about how we're going to end up being, because I was at a cafe and there was an old couple doing a cryptic crossword together. And as soon as they had finished, the wife goes, "Good, now it's time for cake," and gets up to go order the cake. And I was like, what a lovely life.
Yeah.
So,
because that's what my parents used to do, right? So like Sunday morning, my dad would go and make his little espresso thing and a cafetiere, a French press for those who are
in America.
I think they're the only place that calls it that.
Probably.
Anyway, a cafetiere.
It's a liberty press. freedom press.
But yeah, and they'd do their little coffee ritual in the morning, and they'd put on Broadcasting House because we're a Radio 4 house. Could you have guessed, do things like the crossword and stuff together? And that would be their morning ritual. Even when they had me and my sister as, little kids or whatever, that was for them. That was their time together. And I think that's, because it does take a certain amount of time to go through a whole espresso thing and for it to drip out and all that kind of stuff and to make the cafetiere. And I think that, and to be like, okay, now it's time to press it down. They did it from the heart and not from a timer. It was like, I think it's done now. Boop. My dad would test it and be like, no, not ready. I've never worked out what it was he was testing, other than, is the coffee absorbed a bit better now? I don't know. He knew. But yeah, and I think that for, like I said, he used to collect these espresso makers. He has loads of different ones that look different, work in different ways. But they all kind of just sit on the stovetop, but they have slightly different accoutrement, I guess. And every time we'd go somewhere in Europe, particularly, he'd buy one. So we have loads of these little entertaining objects. Because for him, it wasn't necessarily about the fact he was going to use every single one of them. He predominantly used the Pinocchio one that I have there, or like a old metal one, because they were the best ones. But he just liked the action of being like, oh, that's for my little collection of my coffee thing that I do, which I think a lot of us can understand as fans of stuff. You don't necessarily collect everything to do with the thing. You don't have 100 cafetières. You don't have 100 espresso makers. You don't have a cupboard full of beans. I mean, some people might, but most people, when they're involved in a fandom, they pick a thing and they kind of maybe collect a little bit of that, or they engage with a certain element of it, or they decide, actually, that thing that I like, that's a really lovely object that reflects this thing that I enjoy. My other half will tell you that I am incredibly picky when it comes to fandom items. I'm not just, oh, that's my fandom and I'll have it. That's not how I work. It has to kind of fit my entire life and then I can have it. And that's not to say I don't appreciate when people give me things that have to do with my fandoms. I really do. It's lovely because it means they're paying attention. But for myself, when I'm picking things, it's the same with my dad, right? It's about that, is this a lovely item? Is this something that's going to add more to my enjoyment of this hobby, of this space? And I think that's a really interesting part, particularly of things like food fandoms, because they're useful items. They're not necessarily just a statue of a cool character, but they still become collectible. They still become a thing that you want to look at and have as much as being useful. I don't know if Tom has that. I don't know if he has the mix of this one is nice and I like it, but it's not as practical as, say, this one, which isn't as pretty.
No, he's mostly getting just like the thing he needs to make the coffee happen. Tom is also a very kind of more minimalist person. He doesn't like having a lot of things. Yeah. Every time we move, he gets really stressed out by all of the stuff we have. And every time the movers come and go, you don't have that much stuff.
Yeah.
Like, this is real light. Like, the most we have is in books, and that's it. Like, everything else is very bare minimum, and he's like...
I fear one day having to move. I genuinely, I'm like... Though I do think it will be the time that when I eventually do it, and this is a complete tangent, it will be the time that I use to clear out a load of old cosplays that I have yet to let go of, because they're, like, a bit emotionally attached. But I think it will be... Okay, I don't need that now. Which is going to be interesting, but that's a complete tangent. But yeah, I can understand that fear of like, we have too many things.
Yeah, so, you know, so he doesn't go and get like, I'm going to get 800 grinders. Like, that's just not his thing. But we have a lot, like, we have 2 kettles downstairs. We have one for tea and everyday use, which is just a basic ass kettle. And then we have a gooseneck kettle where you can set the temperature. And he uses that one for coffee. I also use it for matcha because I do a whole matcha ritual, right? So we do technically have like 2 kettles, but it's like one fancy kettle that is meant for, because he does a lot of like the, I think some people call them V60s, but they're like filter coffees. Yeah. But like for me, a filter coffee growing up was like with a machine and you could preset it in the morning and then it like goes and like drips coffee down. But he like hand does it into a jug and all that kind of stuff. So
again, that was something my parents used to do. Yeah. Particularly my dad, because we didn't have a filter coffee maker, but his parents did. And so he liked filter coffee. So he would do it by hand just because he couldn't be bothered to buy one. He didn't want to put it on the side. There was no space. Whereas like a hand one, you can put in a cupboard and it doesn't take up any room. And you can buy the filter papers and stuff. But yeah, growing up, I'm pretty sure my grandparents always had a very old one when I was a kid, and my dad used to refer to it as being, so I'm assuming he had it growing up. And I think that was something, again, of like connection to something else. The distinct smell of that filter machine, though, like, it's so specific. Like,
that would probably be a very like homey smell to me, because even like when Tom's making coffee, it's not quite the same as like, because my mom would set it like the night before, so it would auto start going at say 6 a.m. or whatever time it was that she would have it setting. So by the time she got up, there was a pot of coffee that was like ready for her,
like a tea's made.
Yeah, so like she would just go and then pour herself coffee. But my mom drinks like coffee, I don't know if she does anymore, but she used to drink coffee like water. It was just like constantly drinking coffee, which is like the definite single mom of 3 children kind of drink of like constantly downing coffee.
What's so funny though, and you say that like, but the idea of having that coffee, and then maybe it's because I've grown up in the UK watching American movies and TV and stuff, but even that idea of having the filter coffee thing on the side where you grab the pot out and pour it, and like they do in diners and stuff, to me that's almost romantic. It sounds stupid because it's clearly not. It's just like a normal but it's like an idea of what coffee is. And I think this is the thing we've been talking about, is these ways of making something and the culture and all that kind of stuff add a certain, oh my god, it all comes back to storytelling. You know, it adds a way of people engaging with something and going, oh, like for me, the idea of the filter coffee coming out in the diner is like, oh, that's like in the movies, you know. Like the first time I went to America, a place I will clearly not go for many years now, but you know, every time I've gone, and specifically the first time, I was so excited, I think I must have been 15, 16, to go to a diner. Like going to a diner, which we don't have here. We do now, but it's not the same. They're like
American, they're not the same
diners. It's not the same.
They're just themed restaurants. They're not really diners.
Yeah. But going to like a proper one was amazing. It was so cool. And you saw them come out with the coffee and do the thing and give you a top up and be like, how can I get that for you? And it was like, oh, like in the films, you know. And it's so funny that you know, it's just every day, it's just life.
We went to
and it's almost the same as the idea of the Chinese tea ceremony. You romanticize the Chinese tea ceremony. You romanticize the American diner, and because it's not yours, right? It's not something you get. And you know, people here go, "Oh my god, I want to go to like an English pub," and I'm like, "Why?" I mean, they are pretty good, but like, really?
As I mentioned in a previous episode, I'm from North Florida, which is very like Southern America culturally. And so we had a diner that was like right by my mom's house. And this is like an actual, so it's not themed like the 1950s. It is just a building with some wooden stuff in it, and that's it. And they make greasy ass food, and it's amazing.
I assume a diner is like the equivalent of a British greasy spoon cafe, like a truck driver's cafe. Like,
yeah.
So here we have like a lorry driver's cafe or whatever on the side of the road. There's an incredible one opposite St. Martin's in the Fields in London that's been there since like the 70s, and it's amazing. And they do like proper, it's got like those plastic chairs. Anyway, not the point. But yeah, like I assume it's the same kind of idea, right?
That's what it is. And so we went there for breakfast. And Tom got a coffee and was just amazed at, so the woman was walking around with 2 pots, and one's decaf and one's calf.
Yeah.
And she just pour it. And so when he got he ordered a coffee, and then when it was done, she came by and refilled, and he was like, what just happened? And I'm like, well, you ordered a coffee, so they're just topping you up. And he's like, but I didn't have to order a second coffee? I was like, no!
It is funny, because there are things like, so for people who don't know in the UK, one of the things that if you go to a National Trust property, there's a cafe, right? And it's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
National Trust cafes and restaurants are amazing. And part of the reason they're awesome is if you order a tea, they will automatically, without asking, give you a second pot of hot water the same size. And for me, that's the equivalent, right? It's the thing that's like, yes, I didn't have to ask. They just knew.
Yeah, like that's just how this is. When you order a coffee, that's what they do, is you just now have coffee for the whole time that you're here. And it's one of the reasons why I don't think coffee shops really took off in America. I don't know if they have now, but like at least where I grew up, the only thing we had was Starbucks, and that was it.
Starbucks is a pretty big, I think now more because there's like coffee shop culture and it's like a trendy thing. Like again, when I was in New York, it was like a really big thing. Less so in Atlanta.
I was about to say, I also think there's a difference between like a New York versus like Jacksonville, Florida. It's gonna be a different vibe.
Exactly. Like it was definitely interesting in Atlanta because obviously Atlanta is it's a city, right?
Yeah.
It's doing
it's a big city.
We struggled to find anywhere that was just like a coffee shop.
Yeah.
I mean, coffee was everywhere, and there were places that were like coffee places. There was one place that had like a queue around the block for it kind of thing. And I'm guessing because it was probably the only place, at least that we saw, and I can only speak to my experience, that to me was like, that's a coffee shop like I would recognize in the UK.
Mm.
Whereas everywhere else was more like a diner or something.
Yeah, I was about to say, I think diners were that thing, because like when I was like at uni, there was a diner just off campus, and people would go there because typically diners are 24/7. So there's no closing time. You get basically a constant flow of coffee, and you can eat food the whole time that you're there. So people would be sat up with laptops and working and occasionally ordering food, and they would have coffee fill-ups. And it's like being at a cafe, but it's just at a diner.
Yeah. I think, I have friends of mine who live in Atlanta do listen to this podcast every so often, and I would like them to correct me. Tell me, are there coffee shops? There must be. But what is coffee shop culture like in Atlanta? Explain to me. I was there for 5 days and I hated it. So, I'm sorry to Atlanta. It was not for me. It's too hot.
Yeah. I'm not a big fan of the heat down there. I was happy to move to Scotland. I do have to say, though, the coffee shop culture, particularly in Europe, is one of the things that drove me to wanting to move to over here. As I said before, I go to cafes a lot. It's just a thing that because to me, it's still relatively novel. And I've been here for 10 years now, but it's that thing of like, there's just something really lovely about going to a place and having my laptop open and working an environment around people, but where they don't have to be quiet. Because I hate working at libraries. They're just too oppressively quiet. Particularly when I was like at uni. I hated going to the library when I was at all 3 unis had libraries that I did not like because they're always so quiet.
Every time I go to an archive, I have to go and get stuff out of an archive, and so you have to read in the archive reading room because you're not allowed to take things away. It is the worst experience.
I hate it.
And I hate it. Because also you're not even allowed to bring drinks into archives or anything like that. You're often not allowed to wear headphones because reasons. I've never quite understood that. I think it's like a thing of not disturbing each other, but I don't get it.
The British Library
I
is
say
like
this
that
as
too.
somebody, yeah, I say this, my partner is an archivist. I'm like, Egg loves the archive.
You go.
They spend all their, you go be in the archive.
I'll meet you at the cafe after.
I mean, coffee shop culture, I think, is a thing. And again, it's a very broad term because I think coffee shop culture in the UK is probably actually more similar to northern USA, so places like New York and stuff like that, because that's where it came from. So Starbucks and stuff. I do think it's different because we've put our own twist on it, because of course we have, but it's not the same as French coffee shop culture at all. The idea of going and working in a French coffee shop, if you do that in Paris, like, you would be killed. And
no, French coffee shops are for people watching.
Yeah, exactly, absolutely. So sit there and go.
Which is also fun. Yeah,
you sit there with a cigarette and your coffee and also a glass of wine and just judge everybody, and it's amazing. I love that. It's crazy. If you go to Paris, you will see someone doing that. I'm not even lying. On a balcony often. But then again, you go to Italy, and that's very definitely not what you do in Italy. Italy is faster in some ways. You do the shot your espresso, off you go. Or it's that I'm having my long coffee in the morning on a Sunday. You know, they don't have... It's completely different. Yeah. Again, if you're working in a coffee shop in Italy, unless it's like a Starbucks or something, because they don't care, that's Starbucks, that's not proper coffee, they will kick you out. It's not going to happen. Again, I'm sure that, like, because of modern culture and all this sort of stuff, that there will be people who are like, no, I've worked in coffee shops in Italy and there's not been a problem. But I think in general, the culture is not to do that because they don't like it. It's not how you're meant to be in that space. Also, if anyone's interested, there's an amazing French cafe run by a guy from Paris in Kingston. So if you want to go and have the French experience of being told you're not allowed to work in a cafe, go there.
There was, when I was in Durham, there were a couple of coffee shops that did not allow you to work. And I think it was mostly because they just didn't want students in there. Mm-hmm. But
I think mostly now you'll see in coffee shops, they'll have a section that's set aside for people working. Not all, but a lot of the ones around me have a place where it's like, this is where the plugs are. We're not putting plugs anywhere else, or we've blocked them off or something, so you can't sit in those tables. You have to sit at the ones with the plugs. And that kind of thing, which I do think is a good idea, because it means you're kind of getting both sides of the coin in a capitalist sort of way. You're getting the people who are going to come and work and buy like 3 drinks, and then you're also going to have the rotating customers that you will have for the rest of the day without them not being able to sit at a table because someone's there with a laptop. You also now have places that are specifically, I can talk, made for people to go and work in, that have a coffee shop culture. So like, they're not hot desking offices, they're shared workspaces, but they have been purpose built to have that coffee shop in them. But they're not the place you just go and have a coffee, which is, again, an interesting change.
Yeah, there's a coffee shop here in Salisbury I highly suggest to a lot of people, because they've also got really good vegan and gluten-free options for people, which is not always found at cafes. But it's a really wonderful coffee shop, and basically the ground floor and the first floor is like a normal coffee shop, and you can work there. But then the second floor is their co-working space, is what they call it, and you can book a desk, and it's super cheap to book a desk, and you can book it for a certain number of slots of different hours, and then you're in the cafe, and you basically, I've done it a couple of times now, when I've needed to just be out of the house for a long time for some reason, and basically they run you a tab the whole time, and you don't have to buy coffee while you're there because you've essentially paid for your desk, so they don't care either way. But I ordered a drink and they're like, okay, well, we'll put you on the tab, and I was like, oh, I have a tab at a coffee shop.
That's a great idea. And that is, again, it's part of this coffee food culture fandom, whatever you want to call it, because it's adding another layer to it. It's adding it's not taking away from it. The fact is that we all now have this perception of the idea that people will go and work in coffee shops. That's part of their culture now. And it actually kind of always was. Like I said, those original coffee houses in the 17th century, people would go and do business there.
Yeah.
They were places to work as much as places to socialize. And I think that's always been inherently part of them. And so I do find it interesting that there's a difference, because you have the cafe culture, which is French and Italian and Spanish. It's Mediterranean, cafe culture, versus coffee shop culture, which is maybe coming more from those coffee houses and maybe is more American, and so maybe has a slightly faster pace to it. We know how Americans love to be speedy sometimes, at least in North America. But like, there is definitely a different kind of thing. And now they're sort of merging together, that cafe culture and coffee shop culture are becoming one thing, because they will.
Well, and I think that also there's more people who now, post-COVID, are working from home, quote unquote. Yeah. And so if you're working from home constantly, then you are going to, as someone who works from home constantly, there's a reason I go to cafes a lot, because I get fucking sick of being in my house. Yeah. And it's a way to get out of the house for like 2 hours, but I still have to get my job done.
Yeah.
So it's a way to get your job done, not at your house, which is really nice.
So I go to a coffee shop or a cafe to work on the days when I am really struggling to work at home, because if I'm sitting surrounded by other people and they've got my laptop out, it's like I'm guilt tripping myself. I'm like, no, they have to see me working. I can't sit here and watch YouTube. I'm sat in a coffee shop. And it's so funny that it literally will be the only, sometimes if I'm like, writer's block is up the wall, or the executive function is executive functioning, and it's like, I can't do anything but watch a stupid YouTube video for 3 hours, and I don't want to watch a video essay on how coffee's made. I will take myself to a coffee shop because I know I'm only doing it to not work. And then actually it's so funny that being around other people and that noise and that kind of bustle of the place will make me work more so than if I go to a library. If I go to a library, I can kind of not, because a lot of people, particularly at the library here, a lot of people who are there are sixth form students.
Yeah.
And so they're not working in the same way that I am. They're revising or they're not revising. And so it's not the same thing. Whereas when I was at university and when I lived in Bath, if I went to the library there, the people there would be on like the same level of me as their work. And so again, that sort of guilt tripped me into doing the work, which sounds mad. But like it's an interesting thing about that. But that's, again, sorry, a tangent. But yeah, coffee shops are my way of going, you need to get something done. You can only stay for this long because you can only afford this many coffees in a day. So,
Yeah,
work fast.
I did a makeshift writing retreat, if anyone's interested. It's up on my YouTube channel for my vlogs. But I did it just over 2 days, and I did cafe hopping for it, because I did it just around Salisbury, because it's like, I can't afford to go travel somewhere to do a fancy writing retreat. So I'm going to just force it where I can't go home until a certain time period. And so I was out all day hopping to different cafes and getting lunches out and stuff. And I wrote 17,000 words over the course of 2 days. It was amazing, because it was like, well, I have to do it. Like, what else I don't have anything else. I can't go and get distracted by doing stuff around the house. I can't do any of that stuff. So it was fantastic.
Or other people, yeah. So like the likelihood of I'm having some life changes at the moment, and the likelihood of me spending more time in coffee shops quite high because of those life changes. So it's going to be like, I'm leaving. I need to be away from you. It is, because sometimes if there are people around, particularly your family, your partner, all this kind of stuff, as people who work from home, particularly as creatives who work at home, you get interrupted a lot.
What I would be interested in, and it's not something that I know very extensively about, so I would love to hear from people from Australia, because Australia has a big coffee culture, and particularly a coffee shop culture that I am aware of, but I don't know the ins and outs of it. So if anyone lives there and would like to give us their little 2 cents, I would be fascinated to hear, because I'm so interested in how different that is comparatively, because obviously you have the European influence there, obviously, but also it's so far away from the rest of the European influence that it's like, what does this look like?
Yeah. This has just put a flashback in my head of like watching like Home and Away and Neighbours as like a young child when it was on like TV in like the 90s, early 2000s. And they always were in coffee shops. That was all they were doing. I know it's a soap opera, but like in the same way that EastEnders reflects the fact that people go to the pub, I assume that Neighbours and Home and Away reflect the fact that people go to coffee shops all the time in Australia, because it would be weird if it was made up, particularly if it's popular in Australia.
But yeah, I know that it's a really big scene in that country, and particularly in certain cities. I think Adelaide? Someone's gonna kill me. One of those cities is like a really, really big hotspot for it, and it's one of those where if I ever do travel over to Australia, I'm gonna be so excited to do a lot of cafe jumping around. But I just don't know much about it other than the fact that it's a thing. So I
mean, if we're going back to like the coffee shop culture, but also coffee fandom, I have a friend who, whenever she goes on holiday, will work out her entire structure of a time in a city around coffee shops to go to. She'll look up the best ones to go to and all this sort of stuff.
I
Not
love
the
it.
entire time. She'll do loads of other things. But that will be like at least one part of the holiday is we went to this amazing coffee shop, and she'll show me pictures of the amazing coffee shop. She loved it that much. And I'm like, cool, coffee shop. Excellent. And it was funny because when we went to Prague at the beginning of the year, they'd been the year before, and she literally sent me a map, like a Google map, where she'd marked all her favourite places to go. And she was right. They were all amazing. We didn't go to all of them, but the ones we did go when we were, in the area of them, we were like, damn, that's amazing. Which is very funny.
I do that. I do that in fine coffee shops, but the big thing that I do is bakeries, which often also have a coffee side to them. And for anyone who's interested, I did a coffee shop tour around Bristol. I went to bakery/coffee shop tour, because not everyone that I went to is a coffee shop. Some of them were just straight up, you buy bread here, bakeries.
Yeah.
But we did a bakery tour where we hit up 7 different places in the day around Bristol, and it was to celebrate me getting residency. It was amazing. But yeah, it's something that I do a lot, and Tom always is unsure about doing it with me.
I'm going on a little half trip with my family, half writers retreat for me to get my line edits done in a few weeks' time. But I've been reliably informed there are some incredible bakeries, one of which is in a lighthouse, and I'm like, I'm going to spend the whole day there. There are puffins near the lighthouse, so probably people can guess now pretty much the idea of where we're going, but I'm not telling you where or when, so it's fine. But yeah, apparently there are loads of puffins around the edge of the lighthouse because and you get to just watch them, and I'm like, I will be writing and I will be so distracted.
I will be there
by the puffins. I'm like, look at them. Yeah, I'm really excited for that. This has been a great episode. We've just talked about food.
I know. I was so excited about it.
Coffee shop culture. It's been great. I thought it was going to be like weird. Like, what are we going? We're going to talk about coffee, and we're going to talk about how it came to Europe and stuff. No, we didn't talk about any of that.
No.
I still think that we probably maybe have a conversation about the history of where coffee came from, but we don't need to, because you can listen to the amazing You're Dead to Me, who did an episode on it from an actual historical point of view, and they do talk about the colonialism elements. So go listen to them. They're actual historians. They'll know more about it. You should go and it's on BBC Sounds. I'm just plugging another podcast on our podcast, but it is a really good episode. Yeah. If you're interested in coffee. This has been super, super interesting, and a really fun discussion about how we use food as in general, as culture. I think it's fascinating. And obviously we've used it today to have this conversation about how we interact with our lives. So thank you for giving us this idea. I think it was your brother-in-law.
Was it? I'd have to relook it up because it was a while ago, but it might have been. My brother-in-law who listens to this he's also very into coffee. And we were actually just visiting them recently, and he was making us coffee a lot. So
it was a great suggestion, whoever it was. And if you are subscribed to our Patreon, like we said at the beginning, you can get on our Discord and suggest episode ideas for us. We are a bit fully booked for season 3, but that doesn't mean we can't do bonus episodes, and it doesn't mean we can't do things in the future. So do
and we also are going to be doing, obviously, once the season is over, doing our bonus episodes over on the Patreon. So it gives us ideas when we're stocking up on it. So, and
also, if you are part of our Patreon, we will be doing Q&As for the next couple of months for our Patreon subscribers, and you also get you get the episodes early, which is cool. You get them on Friday rather than Monday, and you will get some nice little tidbits behind the scenes when we do them, which will probably be us being silly in blooper reels. Enjoy that. Thank you, as always, for listening to us and this ramble about coffee. This was great. I really enjoyed it. I've had a lovely time. I'm hoping Vivian's had a lovely time. Oh, yeah,
definitely.
And we will be back in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Look out for us in your feed. Once again, we have to say thank you to Moira Dakin for our new logo. I'm going to do it every episode this season because it's great. Go and check Moira out. She's an amazing designer. We will see you soon. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you for listening. Remember to like, review, and subscribe wherever you are listening to this podcast, and do give it a share. Tell your friends, family, fellow fans. Get the word out however you feel like you can. You can follow us on social media. Links are in the show notes, as well as some links to further reading for anyone who might be interested. Music for this episode was Nowhere Land by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0. This episode was produced by Vivian Asimos and Holly Swinyard.